I hope you don't mind, but I've always been uncomfortable sitting at the adult table, so I'm going to come be of the people. You know, I have to say, I've got this wonderful presentation prepared that is completely irrelevant now because everything's fine with Florida libraries. You're just swimming in budgets, and you just don't know what to do with the extra staff, and all right. All right, so there's a joke I've used before, but it seems appropriate for this time. God calls a meeting in heaven, and he calls Linnaeus, the father of modern classification in biology, the reason we had to learn all those Latin phylums and such, Melville Dewey, and Pat, a public library director who had passed away the week before, into his office. He says, the reason I've called you all before is I've done it, I pulled the trigger, I called the apocalypse, I brought up all the souls from Earth. They're, in fact, in that room behind that door over there. But I've got a problem. The problem is when I came up with this plan, there were like a couple million of you, and you got busy, and now there's like 9 billion people in that room, and I'm having a hard time figuring out who goes through the pearly gates and who goes in the other direction. Can you help me? Linnaeus says, no problem. Walks through the door. Hour goes by, 2 hours, 3 hours goes by. After 5 hours, finally he staggers out of the room and says, I ran out of Latin. I found like one steampunk Japanese teenager, and I just couldn't get a nominative for that. So Melville Dewey, not being a man who shies away from impressions of his own abilities, turns around, walks through the door, 3 hours, 4 hours, 10 hours later, crawls out of the door, what little hair he has left, in a shambles, his glasses askew, he goes, there just aren't enough numbers, right? After I had classified 300 different types of Christianity, I just ran out. At which point, Pat pivots on her heel, turns, goes through the door, 2 minutes later, walks out and says, done. God says, done? Yeah, done. She goes, how in the world did you finish? She goes, it's very easy. I asked everyone who had ever voted to increase the library's budget to raise the hand, and I told the rest to go to hell. In preparing for this talk, I sort of set out on Twitterverse and said, okay, Florida, what do you want me to say? And I got one response who was from Mike Eisenberg, my former advisor who lives in Seattle. What do you think? And he says, they want to hear that things are, everyone loves libraries and librarians just as they are, but they need to hear that that isn't true. That the web and Google have changed everything. Libraries and librarians must radically change or risk becoming quaint anachronisms. Ooh. The radical word, I like the radical word. I was just sort of implied that I was a radical constructivist the other day. How many of you would sort of declare yourself as radical? Okay. It's a really funny word, isn't it? It's a word, I had to go look it up, because it's one of those words that we sort of label people with in a pejorative way. Radical fundamentalism, and this radical socialism, and radical this, and radical that. And yet it's also a term that we kind of proudly take on ourselves. I'm a radical, right? You know, it's a curse word, you know, it's a and a floor wax. But so I went to look up because that's what I do, and there's sort of lots of definitions, but one of them, and one I actually didn't know too well, is that it's fundamental. That when you talk about roots or origins, when you get down to its core causes, it's radical. For example, things that grow out of the root of a tree are called radicals. The core words, the root of words in grammar are called radicals. And unfortunately, these days, we've become too familiar with things like breast cancer when you talk about radical mastectomies, which means it gets rid of the whole thing, right? The other one, which is probably one we're more used to, is extreme, that they're on the fringe, right? That favoring extreme change in existing views. Now, it's interesting that it has these two definitions. And by the way, the third one, which I like, is that it's excellent or cool. So being a child of the Bill and Ted era, radical, right? And you know, it's got a word here that quite literally means fundamental and extreme. It means two different things, and cool. And so when I sort of looked at those words and I put them together, and I put them together, I said, librarianship. Librarianship is a radical profession. So what I would like to do, just a brief amount of time, we're going to have more time to talk another session if you're interested, is sort of talk, I'm going to make an argument that we are a radical profession, and I'm going to make a bigger argument that you yourselves need to be radicals. Right? So I'm going to start by saying we have a rather amazing history as a profession of radical action. Right? And I'll start with sort of something that lots of people would claim is core to us, literacy. Now, this is one of those awkward moments where I realize that sitting behind me is the president of the American Library Association. When I say and admit in public that I hate the read posters. Sorry. I mean, like my wife will tell you at dinner, don't mention the read posters. He'll just go off. Now, why do I hate the read posters? Because they're like ugly or what? Because what we're doing is we are advocating for a necessary human activity that can be done in many, many different settings, regardless of whether it's a library or not. And frankly, what we're doing is we're getting people to do what they need to do and can do anywhere. Right? That in essence, what this is really about, and I know there's the halo effect that if Rachel Ray thinks the library's cool, then we must be cool. But what we're saying, it's like, eat. Yes. I'm also on record of talking about the fact that I hate the idea of love of reading. We don't talk about the love of math. We talk about the power of math. It's not like Britney Spears is on a poster going, math, kill, right? We don't do that. And yet somehow we believe that people must love reading. I don't love reading. I may love what I'm reading. I may love what I can do because of what I read, but the actual act of, there's an A, yay, it doesn't happen. Now, I do want to say, though, that the history of literacy in libraries is a radical invention. That we deal with it, we sort of make it seem pristine, but really we've been hiding a real subversive radical nature behind our comfortable shoes and buttons for a long time. And this is an example. Do we look at reading, do we mean pacifying? Because there's lots of reasons that a community should read. One reason that we want you to read is so that you don't sort of look at what we're doing. Right? Read this stuff. Read this stuff and don't pay attention. In fact, what's interesting, we talk a lot about gaming in libraries as if it's something radical new. My colleague in Syracuse, Scott Nicholson, did a little history. He said, in Victorian England, libraries opened gaming parlors in the library. They had billiards parlors and card tables, and they didn't do it as a marketing gimmick. They did it to keep people out of the pubs. Places, right? So do we look at read as distract yourself? Think about the language you use, take you to another world, take you outside of things. Or do we say, other worlds are good, but we got a lot of problems in this world. When we talk about literacy, are we talking about, one, the acquisition of a skill? Are we talking about a way of entertaining ourselves? Or are we talking about something much more fundamental, which I think we are? Which is what we're talking about with literacy is power. My definition of literacy is power. To be literate is to be able to engage in a medium, not only decode the messages in the medium, but use those messages to your advantage. In essence, when you watch the news, don't just take what they're saying, but try and understand what's really going on. When you read this book, don't just take it at face value, try and understand what's really going on. It's power. To read in this country is to have power. The illiterate class do not have power. Now, many people may be uncomfortable with that word. It's really interesting. Libraries, we don't do power. We do empowerment, but we don't do power. How do you give people power, empower, unless you get it yourself, unless you are powerful? So, Saul Alinsky, an honest-to-God radical in his time, he wrote a little book called Rules for Radicals. You may have heard of it, not because you read it and you were worried about in the 70s and marching on capitals and such, But if you remember the healthcare debate, universal healthcare debate, this conservative grassroots effort that got up to tell us about, socializing medicine and all that stuff, a lot of that was formed out of conservative think tanks where they had this as mandatory reading. And I mean, why not use other words than power? Words that mean the same but are peaceful and do not result in such negative emotional reactions. As we use purifying synonyms, we dissolve the bitterness, the anguish, the hate, the love, the agony, the triumph attached to these words, leaving them an aseptic imitation of life. What I'm going to call for you to do is to think like a radical, to take on these words. So what would I put in place of those read posters? What would I put instead? Question posters. Question power at your library. Question society at your library. Question authority at your library. Why is the library important? Because it gives us access to books or DVDs or websites. Because it gives us access? Or does it teach us as a community to be people that question, that probe, that look deeper, that look further, that empower our communities to say, how are we being run and how can we be run better? When we talk about Jefferson and Madison, when we talk about Carnegie, here are people that talked about literacy, that talked about information, not in terms of being well-read or entertained or gentrifying. They talked about it as fundamental to democracy. And remember that when they were writing and saying these things, democracy was not this grand agenda that everyone wants it and we give it away. Democracy was a radical concept that put their life on the line when they broke away from other governing systems. That when we look back to the roots of public libraries and academic libraries and education, we are adopting a radical view of self-governance. We are adopting a radical view of power and empowerment. That those read posters, that glass eye in Yoda's eye looking at it is a little revolutionary sparkle going on in there. Democracy you must have, whatever it is. That librarianship is about radicalism. That, Melville Dewey, good God, Melville Dewey. The librarian must be library militant before he can be the librarian triumphant. I mean, what we have to remember is that we are radicals. And you go, Jefferson, he was busy. That was cool stuff. We're in Florida. It's fine. What I want you to understand, and Roberta made mention to this. Roberta talked about two things that really caught my eye. The first, caught my eye? What the hell? Caught my ear. The first is she talked about a paradigm change that we're living through. Now, many people don't necessarily know where that phrase came from, paradigm. We use it so much, paradigm shift, paradigm shift. It came from a fellow by the name of Kuhn, who was looking at scientific disciplines, physics and chemistry and such. And what he found is as he looked at the literature and he looked at the performance, what would happen is that the mainstream ideas, this is how an atom works, this is the grand unified theory, it's relativity, whatever, dominates a field. There's a mainstream. And what would happen is, right around the edges, there would be these crazy ideas. And what would happen, and rarely, is that every so often those crazy ideas subverted the mainstream and became the new mainstream. That's what a paradigm shift was. When we stopped talking about relativity and we started talking about quantum mechanics. When we started talking about new ways of looking at economics. In library science, when we stopped talking about just collection management, started talking about services. That's a paradigm shift. But what I want to be real clear here is that paradigm shifts don't just happen. It's not like you're walking down one day and someone goes, man, have I been wrong for 30 years. You're right, come on over and publish that paper. Paradigm shifts are the result of deliberate, conscious action by the people on the periphery to become the mainstream. It is necessarily a radical action, and it is an insurgent reaction into the common held precepts of a community. It, in essence, is done by people, deliberately for people. If you want to talk about a paradigm shift in library science, you are the ones responsible for making that happen. It's not going to happen to you. You can't sit back and observe and say, Twitter, let's go! Right? You've got to say, this is what we're going to do. You must have an internal understanding. And in librarianship, we're a profession that has lasted for 3,000 years at least. Right? That's a long time. It is not that that profession has survived because it has not changed. That profession has survived because it has radically changed. It took time of turbulence, of conflict, of deliberate action to say, we are going to go in this direction now. It was a radical concept to take the chains off the books. Can you imagine the committee meeting that went on? And this was before RFID. Right? That was a radical action. It was a radical action when we made the shelves open. This is an image from Kosovo. And it's a recent image where you go through that window to ask for the material that you want. And in society after society today, that remains the same. It was a radical action to say, this is the collection of the community. The community can browse it and see it and change it and move it and shelve it and do all this stuff. Radical action. Mel was a radical. He said universal classification, efficiency. We don't necessarily have to agree with a lot of what he said, but he made it happen. Once again, he didn't write this nice little 10-second, oh, decimals, cool idea, and put it on a shelf, and then someone discovered it. He helped form the American Library Association to publish more books. I mean, it's a pretty impressive scheme. It took efforts to go and change the community. Librarianship has gone through radical times, and we have changed not because of some preordained understanding, not even because the culture asked us to. In many cases, radical change has come to librarianship because librarians thought in a radical way. It took a conscious effort to make that happen. And I say now, we live in the midst of a radical time that is in desperate need of subversive, radicals in librarianship. Don't believe me? Look at the internet. Oh, great, the internet. Yeah, I've been to that conference 16 years. 16 years old. The web is, if someone was born when it was invented, they can only now kind of drive. Right? We're not talking glacial time. We're talking something radical. Right? And we're talking about things like the Great Recession. We live in times that make the 30s seem like a grand memory. We deal with times where people have lost their job. Let's face it, everyone sitting here right now knows someone who was laid off. Everyone sitting here has been impacted by this budget. Everyone here has had to deal with the aftermath of a bubble and etc. These are trying times. They will write textbooks about this era. And let's face it, we live in amazing radical times. We live in times where the people have taken over their seats of government to say, we want freedom and a voice. And that's in Wisconsin. The Berkeley of the Midwest. We live in times that call not for the status quo, that call not for waiting it out, that call not for, oh, the budget will come back if we just wait for it. Right now, we desperately need radical militant librarians. You can go online and buy this as a t-shirt. The phrase, by the way, people don't know where the phrase came from. It came from an FBI memo talking about the Patriot Act. And if only a few radical militant librarians would shut up, we could move on with fighting terrorism. Screw you, FBI! We need that again. We need to stand up to that power. We need to stand up and say our communities are too important for this. We need a new mission. But we need to be radicals. And I don't mean radicals as just extreme and crazy and cool. I also mean having a fundamental core skill. Over that 3,000 years, librarianship has changed radically. but the mission has remained relatively stable. The mission has endured. The tools changed. Let's face it, Library of Alexandria had another committee meeting when they went from tablets to this new mobile technology called scrolls. People can have a scroll, they can have it in their house. What the hell are we going to do about that? The mission of librarians. Notice today I am not talking about libraries. Libraries can't do squat but sit there, exert gravity, and fall apart. Librarians are what makes it happen. If I see another mission statement from you guys that goes, the library will, the library won't do crap. Librarians, you will make this happen. You will make that happen. You made a decision. If the library's website's crap, it's your fault. The mission of the librarian, which is a radical mission, it is both fundamental and extreme and awesome, is to improve society. Feel free to stop there. But how? Through facilitating knowledge creation in our communities, by going into our communities so that they can make better decisions, to go into our communities so that they can understand and better manipulate the world so they too can become radicals. Notice that this is a mission of you. Not an institution, not an organization, not an abstraction, of you. When those people called the legislature, when those people found the Bridge Club, when those people made action, they didn't do it just because you were a building with books. They did it because of you. When Borders closes, there are lots of signs, and they all read, "Come and pick over our dead bones at 30% off." When a library closes, people picket themselves to the front of that library. And if they don't, why not? When we talk about revolution, we talk about you. In Egypt, as the crisis was going on, as the people were protesting, violence was erupting in the street. In Alexandria, people joined hands to surround the Library of Alexandria, to protect it. Not one stone was thrown on it, not one window was broken. And it wasn't because of the collection. It wasn't because they had a beautiful building. It's because that was them. That was the best of themselves. That was their aspirations. That was their knowledge. That was their cathedral to a better society. And it can happen whether you're the Library of Alexandria, the Library of Congress, or the Library of Broward County, or the library of this little place. Talk to developers in Dallas. They're talking about gentrifying neighborhoods. They bought entire neighborhoods, and they're going to make the library the centerpiece of it. And you talk to the developer, and you ask, is it so they have better access to books? He says, no. He says, it's a third space. Actually, he said it's a fourth space. Right? The first one's where we live, where we deal with our children. The second one is where we work, where we deal with other children. The fourth one's where we shop, where we act like children. And the fourth space is where we come together and decide what we want to be tomorrow as a group, as a society, as we understand things. What is a library? How do I define this thing of a library? The library is an infrastructure and tools that a librarian uses to fulfill their mission. That's right, they named the building after us. Stop it right now. Oh, we're named after a building. Stop it. The building was named after bark of trees in Rome. We can change meanings. Right? I foresee a future where we can have fewer libraries and a hell of a lot more librarians. We used to talk about accountants as people that worked in accountancies. You had to go to accounting house. Now, everywhere, and they're vital because they provide a societal function. Where's ours? What are we doing? Where do we go? So I ask you again, how many of you would see yourselves as radicals? Are you willing to be radicals for your communities? Are you willing to talk to homeowners who have lost all their money and a mortgage that they cannot pay? Can you be a radical for them? Can you be a radical for students wasting away in underperforming schools? Can you be a radical for the new graduate who now has more debt from his academic achievement than credit card debt? Can you be a radical for the people of Alabama who lost their communities in tornadoes, or the people in Katrina where they blew out every building and they're now rebuilding a library? That's who we're radicals for. No one's going to ask us to be radicals. No one's going to give us permission to go out and change that society. Radicals don't wait for permission. We as a profession have prided ourselves on being ready and standing ready to serve our communities. No one changes the world by standing ready. They do it through action. They do it through reaching out. They do it in making things happen. And just as we are willing to be radicals and look at our communities, we must be radicals and look within ourselves. We must take every service, every function, every budget item, we must put it under a microscope and say, do we still need this? Not, can we still afford this? Not, so we can do more with less. Hell, we can't do more with less. But we must do different if we ever want to get more. Do not say this is a temporary blip. Do not assume that when the money comes back, you hire everyone back. That's a horrible message to say, but it's the truth. Maybe you can't add 25 new keywords to every copy catalog record you bring in. Maybe you can't offer the Sunday service. Maybe you close the building and keep the librarians hired on those days, and they go out into the community and they serve them in their homes, in their offices, in their classrooms. That's what being a librarian is about. How can we expect radical positive change in our communities to make this a better place to be if we are not willing to embrace that change ourselves? To be a librarian is to be a radical. And to be a radical is to change the world. And I know we can do it. Thank you. Thank you.